Hi, everybody, and welcome to the MSUwma podcast. This is Justin Jackson. Today's guest is the greatest financial advisor on planet Earth. And he's also my boss. Jon Solitro is an MSU alum as well as a financial advisor and CEO at Financial MD, a technology-centric RIA based in Lansing, Michigan that works with physicians all over the United States. Jon has been a great mentor to me in business and life, so I'm very excited to share this episode. I hope you all enjoy the show.
We're recording this here in the Lansing, Michigan area, and this is kind of where I grew up. First 10, 12 years was over on the west side of Michigan. That was moving away in junior high and then coming back to it. I realized it's kind of redneck, but, you know, that's where I'm from and where my family is in Paw Paw, Michigan. But was the middle of three boys and grew up in a pretty, solid nuclear family. My parents are still married to this day, and really liked to teach us, give a lot of lectures. Like my dad, my impression of my dad growing up was he just talked all the time to us about stuff and, what to do better. And everything was a life lesson, but I'm grateful for it now. But went to, so being the middle, you kind of learn to be independent and, just do your own thing, which I did and was happy to do. That was my personality. And went into high school and playing all the sports and decent grades, was captain of soccer team, basketball, and was got pretty decent grades, was in the top 5 in my class. Out of a class of 14 people. So that's not that impressive, but I went to a small private school. But graduated and actually had aspirations to be a doctor. Wanted to do music. When I was in high school, I went to a Christian school and we had these chapels, and we had like a worship band and a worship leader up front. And that was my first real exposure to that kind of worship and having a deeper relationship with God. And so it inspired me, and I learned how to play guitar, and I did that. And I told my parents, I want to do this for a living. And they're like, well, you can do that on the weekends, but you should really just, get a real job. And I said, okay. So went to MSU for pre-med, enjoyed my freshman year there in Holmes Hall, and got into, sent down to the, whoever the guy in charge of the dorm was, and had to chat with him a few times for different things, but nothing that ended up on the permanent record. If anybody knows Kent Workman, tell him I said, what's up? But one time we were up late, bored. There was a few of us from the floor that were kind of partying. We're like, man, we're hungry, but we're out of food. We're like, maybe by chance the cafeteria is unlocked. So we went down there, tried to kind of jimmy the door open with a butter knife, didn't work. So we're like, let's go find some better tools. So we went down in the basement, kind of the janitor closet, and I was kind of the lookout. And so they're kind of messing around in the maintenance closet, and I'm kind of looking around down in the basement, and I see this like service elevator. And so just kind of like, wonder where this goes. So I went in the service elevator and went up to the next floor, and opened up inside the cafeteria. And I was like, jackpot. So went down and got the other guys, and we raided the cafeteria. So if anyone's in Holmes Hall, a little tip for you.
What'd you get? Just like frozen pizzas or?
Yeah, anything that wasn't like locked up in the fridges, like bread and Pop-Tarts and just like all that random like snack stuff that was just kind of hanging out and sealed up. And yeah, we made out pretty well. So that was freshman year. Sophomore year, I still lived in Holmes Hall. Started dating a girl pretty seriously, and then fall semester of my sophomore year was when things started to change. I remember driving one day and noticed that my left eye was just seeing things a little bit differently. And so I thought, that's interesting, and went to my eye doctor, optometrist, to get that checked out. And he said, well, I don't notice anything on your eyeball, and, otherwise you're seeing fine. But if you see something in your central vision, you should go, here's an ophthalmologist you can go see. So I went and saw him, who then forwarded me on to a retinal specialist because they thought maybe they saw a cyst or something, but that turned out to be nothing. Made my way through some different doctors and ended up at a neuro-ophthalmologist at MSU. And this was probably then November of that year, and started running through just a battery of tests because it was slowly, this like little tiny floater was turning into a blind spot in my left eye right in the middle, and noticed it was starting to spread a little bit to my right eye. And so wasn't super worried at that point, kind of figured out they'd figure out what the issue, or thought they'd figure out what the issue was and get it resolved. And I was able to do my finals that semester and get those done. Meanwhile, I'm getting blood draw after blood draw and x-ray and MRI and CAT scan and spinal taps, and going to see these holistic doctors, and they're recommending these diets. And one time I had to do, before they did any testing, I did fast for 3 days. And this doctor was like, if you are hungry during this fast, you can take this recipe, juice these particular vegetables, and you drink that if you're hungry. And I said, okay. So after about a day and a half, I'm starving. And so we do this juicing thing, and it's this just green liquid. And I hate vegetables anyway. And so I took a couple gulps, and I was like, okay, that's probably good. And then not half hour later, threw it all up, just green stuff. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not that hungry. So I'm good for the next day and a half. So they didn't really find anything. And so the end of the year comes, and I remember distinctly there was a day when I said I need to stop driving because I just couldn't do it anymore safely. And that was probably early December, going to Christmas. One of my spinal taps, or what they call lumbar puncture, to check the spinal fluid, got infected, which then caused spinal meningitis, which then put me in the hospital for about a week in quarantine over Christmas. So dealt with that. Then after that, we went to Mayo Clinic to see if they could figure out anything. Still just, no positive test results back. Eyes are getting worse, and started back into school in January, just wondering, how am I going to get through school? So I started going to my classes, finding them, and some of the professors were good, some were terrible. So the next class I went to was in Bessie, and it was a philosophy class. Scott Yoder was his name. It was a medical ethics class. And I talked to him afterwards, and he was like, here, there's somebody you should meet. So we walked down the hall to the RCPD, which I'd never heard of before. And he introduced me to people there, and it was game changer. I learned later that MSU was, the #1 school in the state for having a department like that. And so they hooked me up. They had a visually impaired specialist, someone that kind of arranged everything for me. So they scheduled all my exams that year to come do there with a reader and a scribe. They put all my textbooks on audio. They gave me a letter to give to all my professors from then on out, just saying, here's his accommodations, and, extra time on exams and all that stuff. So that is what made it possible for me to graduate, period, let alone, graduate in 4 years. So, So went on through college, ended up, obviously not becoming a doctor, and got a degree in psychology, and got married summer after my junior year, and then kind of felt that bug again to get into music ministry. So when I got out of MSU, we started applying for jobs, and got a job over on the west side of the state at a church, and had my first kid a few months later. So had this new career and a house and a wife and a baby, and life was good. And I felt like I was a professional musician. So it was kind of a dream job. Did that for a couple of years, and then just church politics and stuff, things kind of started to go downhill there. And so we quit, moved back to Lansing. And then maybe 10 days later, my wife at the time said, I don't love you anymore, and I don't want to be married anymore. And she peaced out, is kind of the short story of that. So that totally blindsided me and came out of nowhere, and honestly was harder than dealing with the vision loss thing for whatever reason. But, so they give you 6 months when you've got kids to kind of as a waiting period on divorce. And I fought as hard as I could during that time to try to get her to change her mind or come back, and didn't work. And so after those 6 months, here I was, a single dad with a 2-year-old daughter, and that was hard because it's like, that's not who I am. I never planned to be the divorce guy. And it just felt like it was hard to have that as part of me and my identity. And so I started going back to grad school. I'd gotten a psychology degree, and ended up getting a master's in counseling. And during my schoolwork, I did a few hours here and there at a property management company, got into marketing there, to their sales and marketing department, and really liked that. And so kind of actually started doing that full time while I was in grad school. I was living in East Lansing, and then met Ashley, who is my wife now. We've been married 10 years, and truly an example of how, you go through life and sometimes bad things happen to good people. I'm assuming I'm a good person. And and you're just wondering, like, my life isn't going to get any better. It's just going to suck forever. And then meeting Ashley and just not knowing that there was anybody out there like her, and she's been just amazing. And I'm, my ex-wife isn't going to hear this, but she's better than my ex-wife.
Good. That's good.
Yeah. So we've been married 10 years. We had 3 more boys, and it's been just like, man, it's hard to give people marriage advice, because it's like, if people said, "Hey, why'd your marriage so good?" And I would point to Ashley and be like, "It's because of her." So you can't really duplicate that. So I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But it's truly taken, there's a verse in the Bible that says God turns or makes beauty from ashes. And that's a lot of what I felt like, has been happening since then, is kind of remaining faithful, continuing to do the right thing, and pressing forward, and knowing that there's going to be something good on the other side. And so we got out of grad school. I actually ended up, this church that we started going to hired me full-time to be a music pastor again. So did that for a couple of years. And that I got fired from that, which is another story. But then decided I had my master's in counseling. I was licensed. I would go into private practice. Did that counseling. I was a therapist for a couple of years, and basically got bored of that. It was hard sitting in a room for 8 hours listening to people's story hour after hour, and just kind of, I didn't see a whole lot of progress, and that was tough too. So
Did you like the counseling part though? Like, did you on some level, did you like having conversations with people and helping people?
Oh, for sure. I did. And had it been, as I was at that point, after a couple of years, I was starting to see, how can I scale this? Probably not surprising to you. And I started looking at, hiring other counselors and really starting to scale this thing. But just that was about the time that I ran into Ruben, and we started, I kind of shared, I'm not super happy doing what I'm doing. I'm looking at either growing this into a legit business that I'm running or something. He said, "Well, have you ever thought about financial planning?" He said, "I've always been curious to see how a counselor would do as a financial planner." And I thought, I've heard of it, but sure, why not? Let's take a look. So spent some time with him. Now that I was thinking about that, I ended up really doing my due diligence and looked at tons of different options, from Edward Jones to Raymond James to an independent LPL firm to, fully captive with like New York Life, and kind of everything in between, until I settled on, I got hired with Ruben at what was Principal Financial Group and the Centennial Group in Lansing, and decided that this is what I was going to do. And what I liked about it was that I could have my own business and make my own decisions, which was, it's kind of known around my circles that Jon does what Jon wants, and that not intentionally, that's just, I guess, who I am. And I softened it a little bit around the edges, but we calculated, I counted the other day, I've been fired 5 times. And I kept sitting there. I was like, man, how many times have I been fired? 3 times? No, 4. Oh, no, 5. Yeah.
5 times.
5 times. And, it's at that point I decided I really don't make a good employee.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to work for myself. And so that's what I did. And even then I was working kind of within a team. And so I had to learn a lot about working with the team. I had to, keep my mouth shut and just kind of know that if I was going to be successful in this and get to the point where I was truly running my own show, having my own business, then I was going to have to learn and improve a lot. And then, day one, I decided this was the last thing, because it seemed like every 2 years up to that point, I would try something different. And I was like, I can't do that anymore. I can't put my family through that. And I don't want to do that. I want to I was 30 at the time. And I was like, if I don't commit to something now, I'm not going to have time to build something and really be successful and wealthy. And so that was like, there was no plan B.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I've told every young advisor since then is you can't have a plan B if you want to be successful. And, if you're truly building your own book, if you've got a job where you're an employee at a financial planning firm, great. But I'm talking, if you're going to go out on your own and build this from scratch and hustle up business and do all that, you can't have a plan B. And I felt confident with that because, I knew the system worked. I'd seen people be successful in it. And it was just kind of one of those, if I just do what they did long enough, it'll work. And I didn't see anybody in that office that had been there more than 4 or 5 years that wasn't making 6 figures. And I was like, fine, I'll just work my ass off for 3 to 5 years. And, there was a guy that, that was working along with us. And I was like, if this knucklehead can do it, then, that was kind of my little own pep talk occasionally. It was like, this guy still here and making decent money, then I can do that. And so it was definitely hard. We had young kids, and I told my wife, I've got to work a lot for the next 3 years to really get this going. And we did. Nights, weekends, I was there every Saturday. Most evenings I was there either making calls or doing appointments and just hustling. We really didn't make any money until a couple years in, and, enough to kind of pay the bills. They didn't have like a stipend where you'd get some monthly income over a period. It was like 3-4 months and then you're on your own. And we were building this medical market at the time. So Ruben had started this idea of giving lectures to residency programs, and it had started to work for them. And so I came in to help them build up the Lansing area and then opened up the Detroit area. So I started just kind of starting from scratch, cold calling and saying, hey, we have this lecture series. Can we come in and teach to your residents? And it really took off in Detroit. And then after about 3 years, I started going into Chicago and doing it there. And so we really felt like we had developed this system that was somewhat working. And there was a little bit of a delay on the ROI because we were working with residents who didn't have a ton of money, but we knew that if we can stick this out within 3 to 4 years, they're going to be attending physicians and it's going to be a different story. And so we, that was what is now Financial MD, and where I'm at now. Gosh, it'll be 7 years in January, and it worked, I guess. I'm paying the bills, and some things have happened between now and then, as far as when there was 4 of us that left the Centennial Group and created Washington Avenue Advisors, but still under that principal contract, and then began working towards being completely independent and starting our own RIA. Which we started working towards last year. We were going to form a 4-person partnership. And I ended up just having a gut feeling. And my wife has been teaching me over the years to listen to my gut and know myself. And just knowing that the partnership deal was fair, but not what I wanted. And I loved those guys, trusted them, the other 3. But it was just a matter of, I don't think I would make a good partner. Kind of like I knew I wasn't going to make a good employee. I just felt like I'm not going to be happy here. I just felt like I'm going to end up essentially working for the majority shareholders.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the most equity gets the most votes on decisions and things. And
so how did you come to the conclusion that basically the safest bet for you is to bet on yourself. People talk about, get a job so you have job security, right? But if you've been fired 5 times
It's
and
not right.
and you've had success in your more entrepreneurial career path, like what's kind of going through your head, along that, I guess along that whole process, like
Yeah.
what's
And
your
that's
thought?
the beauty in the financial planning field. You've got options of different paths you can take, right? And that's why financial planners aren't necessarily all one personality type. You got the type that would make great employees, and there's opportunity for that, great. And you got the type that don't. And like I knew I wouldn't make a good employee, I and I see people in jobs all the time that now, knowing what I know now, that anxiety would kill me of just knowing that my financial future is dependent on one person, my boss, who just, and I've experienced that firsthand. You don't get along, and I'm not emotionally intelligent enough to keep my mouth shut all the time, and it doesn't necessarily make for a good employee. So I knew that about myself. And then what you're saying about how would I, why did I feel like I was confident in making the choice to go off on my own? Part of it was, yeah, I'd kind of proved myself to myself, and it was still going to be a risk. I had to, and my wife is amazing and has faith in me when sometimes I don't. And we had developed a system that I was like, I think this system can work. I had built up enough of a client base that I could take with me to give me just kind of a little bit of a pathway to continue to build this on my own. And I just, you do this long enough, after 4 or 5 years, and I'm a little overconfident at times probably, but I just thought I can do this by myself. Like I think I know this, I don't need a big broker dealer watching out for me. And I don't need a big parent company with, they scare you into thinking that compliance is so scary and that you can't do it on your own. You need us, and you need a broker dealer, and you need all that stuff. And I didn't think I did. And I thought, no. And especially in today's, with the technology out there and all sorts of options for outsourcing, I'd kind of put those pieces in my head as I was just learning. And I've always been a student of the industry with like the X5 Planning Network and just talking to people. And that was one thing I've always done, is seek out mentorship. And just when I find someone who seems successful and seems like a decent dude, I'll be like, hey, can we grab lunch and just pick their brain? And so by year 5 or 6, I was like, yeah, based on what I've gathered over the years, it's going to be hard and I'm going to have to work hard again, but I can do it, and it is possible, and the rewards are going to outweigh the risks to me.
So let's talk about the early days of the medical team. You're clearly very visionary. You're probably one of the most visionary people I know. Even as a counselor, you're thinking about, well, how do I scale counseling? Like that's,
Yeah.
that's kind of an unusual skill set that you have, this visionary mind. Like what was going through your head in the early days of the medical team, just seeing the possibilities from this, seminars and all of that stuff? Like what was going through your head as far as scale goes? Did you have a vision for financial MD at that time, or did that come in later?
I remember talking about it with Ruben in 2016. Okay. Ruben and I actually went, and so I'd started in 2014, January of 2014. And within, 2.5 years, I was talking to Ruben about, okay, what's next? How do we make this bigger? I think, okay, this is a cool concept. And I'd kind of proved that I could grow it when I did Detroit and then took it to Chicago. And then I just, for better or for worse, I get bored so quickly with stuff that I need that excitement. And Ruben does too. And so he really connected with that. And he's like, yeah, years ago, I thought we could scale this in a way. And I just kind of squelched that. But, you're kind of rekindling that fire in me that we could really scale this. And we even opened a checking account and filed a DBA back in mid 2016 for Financial MD. And didn't officially do anything with it for 3 years. So it was back then I knew that like we can scale this. I don't think anybody is doing this or doing it to this level. And if we can find a way to, I don't know what it's going to look like, if it's just going to be like a franchise model or other advisors that we teach and give them the systems, or more of a lead generation model. But there were pieces that weren't there that are there now that truly make the scaling possible. And so it was just such good timing. And I can kind of go into what happened this year to really launch it and why it had to be this year and not last year and all that stuff that really made Financial MD possible. But it was just, we'd found a system that it's working on a small level. Whenever I see stuff that, hey, it seems somewhat effective, how can we do 10 times as much?
Yeah. So let's talk about technology. You're probably an early adapter of technology. Is that true? I mean,
we were using WebEx back in 2014 because we would get residents as clients and 80% of them move out to get jobs elsewhere. It's just the way it works because they typically moved here for their residency and they'll either move back or just find a job somewhere. So we knew if we were to keep them with clients, we had to make the whole virtual client advisor relationship work and be successful. And so, we got really good at WebEx at the time.
So with Zoom, it's kind of the Zoom era now with all the COVID stuff. I mean, I feel like a lot of people felt really nervous of the unknown. Do you feel like that you might have not had those nerves just from understanding the quality of service you could give?
Yeah, it definitely helped. In fact, I gave a talk this summer to a group of advisors about how to become a virtual advisor. Never thought that was something I'd want to do or should do, but then you realize there's so much uncertainty in the advisor world. And I'm like, I've been doing this for a couple of years. It's really not that hard. Let me show you guys how easy it can be and that clients will welcome it. And that was part of, I left principal in March of 2020, technically fired again, but I don't know if that's 5 or 6, but, and it was when I look back now, it was just the perfect time. A little bit, I was freaking out like, okay, I had been preparing to jump out and start my own RIA. I had started my own RIA at the time, which is why I got fired. But, so it's what I wanted, but it was still a little scary. I kind of wanted to do it on my terms, on my time, but they found out sooner than I thought. So I said, you need to resign today. I said, okay. So the timing was so good. That was like a week before the quarantine started. And all of a sudden, everybody was okay with doing stuff over Zoom because you had no choice. So meanwhile, I was already comfortable with this. I'd started using Zoom about a year before that, had transitioned from WebEx, and had started utilizing, eMoney and Right Capital and some of the financial planning software to make like the clients believe this is your home base, this client portal. We're going to trade files here. You're going to make sure everything's linked up and our whole relationship is going to be virtual. And I'd been doing that for a while. And so I was able to retain all my clients. We didn't have to skip a beat that way. And, between that and DocuSign and just all the different technology that was out there, I could piece together a completely virtual platform way ahead of other advisors during this quarantine and was able to share that with some other advisors and things. But it made, at least my clients didn't have to have any uncertainty or wonder, like, how am I going to still work with my advisor and vice versa. And so, yeah, that was really good timing. And, on the financial side, another fortuitous sign of that time was, you kind of go for the stretch without money when you're jumping off and starting on your own. And, I was able to qualify for unemployment during that time because everybody was, and the paycheck protection loan we were able to qualify for, and like SBA stuff. It was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would have done without that. And it was just so cool.
So business models, could you break down basically what your original medical team business model was at Washington Avenue Advisors and what Financial MD is today and how they're different?
Yep.
And basically maybe where you're trying to take it. What's kind of the vision? What's the long-term goal right now for Financial MD?
Well, when we started, it was kind of this kind of a ghetto-fied way of doing things. Like we kind of duct taped this process together because we were all independently contracted with principal. So we had this statutory W-2 status where we'd get some insurance commissions, and then we were a registered rep under their broker dealer, Principal Securities. We were under their RIA, Principal Securities. So it was this kind of hybrid relationship where we could name ourselves something like Washington Avenue Advisors. But when actual business was written, fees were taken, accounts were opened, we had to split it 3 different ways on every single account. So we couldn't, there wasn't any revenue. There was no actual business. Everybody had their own self-employed entity. And so we may do joint work together. We had a team of 5 or 6 of us that were doing the medical market. And depending who was involved, and then you had to kind of write in the override for Ruben, who was kind of the head of the team at that point. So we simulated this business model. And it was when I was one of the newer advisors, I had to kind of create my own business, get workshops at these hospitals. I'd bring a senior advisor to go do the workshop. Then I would get the surveys and call on them and try to schedule some consultations with these residents and get them to understand the concept of financial planning and what they needed, and cultivate that relationship and learn the business at the same time and how to do service work and process paperwork. And so that was the business model for a few years. And then it was that way all the way up until this year, because we've been with Principal for, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 6 years until March of 2020. And there was no formal actual entity or LLC or anything. So that was the business model. And then our team left that main kind of corporate office. We got our own office, which we could do, still had the same contract with Principal, but we now had to kind of share some expenses with our income and started to kind of look more like a team and an independent advisor. And then we weren't truly independent until this spring.
Okay. Current business model, Financial MD. How's it different? I know you've integrated an app. What are you trying to offer different that as an independent now with your own model than you were before?
So, Financial MD is what I had started. I started an RIA with the state of Michigan. And that was, so it's all the business goes in, revenue comes to the RIA, and that's the kind of business model as far as the financial background of it. It's an LLC, and but it's just me right now. So it's me and a couple staff, and paying myself whatever's left over. And the business model of how we're transitioning from what we did to what we want to do is basically, the idea was, how do we take what we did and we make it completely virtual? And, you and I have talked about this, like it might hurt a little bit to take even some of the, Detroit workshops and things, from taking them from in-person to virtual, but in the long run, it's going to be good. And so that was what the idea was, is how do we take these in-person workshops? I may have done 50 or 60 a year sometimes. And that can only scale so much. And how do we take this into a virtual model that can truly scale to where I can go from that to having no drive time and do virtual seminars and workshops, which then would allow us to do them anywhere in the country. And then the next level is, what if we do these workshops and I don't even have to be there? It's basically a course and pre-recorded workshops that have a very good follow-up and conversion process to get these prospects to become clients. And that's always a thing before I want to implement anything, is this good enough? Is the process and the customer journey so good that, it'll be almost as effective? Because nothing's as effective as going out in person. But if it saves you time and you're able to scale, then it's worth it. If my conversion rate is 50% from doing an in-person workshop, and then it drops down to 20% from doing virtual, but I'm able to do 10 times as many, then that makes sense. So that's kind of where we took it. So we decided, how can we do this virtually? And then about a year ago, we started working on an app with a company called Pocket Nest that would be specifically a financial planning app, kind of like a Mint, but a little more, puts together a financial plan for residents. And we felt like that market was underserved. We had a niche with residents that we could give them some good financial tips. If they weren't ready to become a client yet, well, at least they can take this free app. We have a weekly didactic minute video. It's a 2-minute video that I put out about just some kind of, basic financial tips, and that people can tune into. We're putting stuff on social media a couple times a day, every day, and then starting a podcast this week. So it was just, like giving a ton of content. I think we can win with content, having an app that they can utilize that kind of keeps us connected to them, even if they're not ready to become a client yet. And then just setting the precedent up front that this financial MD ultimately is going to be a financial planning technology with the option of a financial planner for residents, and then ultimately transitioning them into practice. But that's kind of the vision I see it. And long-term, I think we can be so good at we want to be the name in financial planning for residents nationwide, is that when people think of financial resources or residents or financial planning for residents, they think of financial MD, or financial education for residents, they think of financial MD. And, 10 years, we'll see where things are at, but the goal is to get it something that's an entity, a company of value that could be sellable or still scalable again, or something like that. That's kind of my big picture. And then what? I don't know.
Nice. So do you mind if we talk about advisor skills, like developing yourself as an individual advisor?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, first thing, you mentioned your 50 to 60 seminars. You're an excellent public speaker, like top-notch public speaker. I can
thank you.
see it firsthand. You're pretty great. How did you get good at public speaking, selling yourself through a presentation, educating people? Is that because of your background as a musician? Is that something self-taught? Did you practice that? Did you rehearse that? How'd you get to that?
I probably have an abnormally high level of confidence, to, good, bad, or indifferent. And it's more of I didn't let those anxieties get in my way when I wanted something. So very first example was, I knew the feeling of, like, in 10th grade, I was in the school play and like had the lead role in the school play, which probably doesn't surprise you. And I loved it, and there was super nervous and anxious, but like once you get going, and like that was so fun, it was worth the nervousness. And then in my brain, I quickly knew, okay, that nervousness only is temporary, because once you get up and get going, you forget about it. And so then as I started learning music and leading worship in chapels and the school and stuff, like same thing, it was easier to get started in doing that because I knew that nervousness was going to be there, but it didn't mean anything. We have this, and this is probably my psychology coming into play. We have this, when we hit anxiety, it hits our kind of fight or flight sympathetic nervous system to tell us you're going to die here. Like this is dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's what our body feels. And you have an anxiety attack or a panic attack, like that's what's going on. But in my head, like, that's not true, but it's hard to convince your body of that. And so as I just started doing it, there's no way to become a good public speaker without actually doing it. And so doing the music absolutely helped, because not only was I talking, I was singing and I was playing guitar and doing all that stuff. So I did that at least once a month for years, be it in church or school or just different places like that. And then it was probably, I was 22 when I had to preach my first sermon in front of the church. So I did a couple of those. That was kind of my first quote unquote public speaking performance. And then did that a few more times. And then when I was in the marketing department for the property management company, I had to do some videos and speak in front of people. And, and then when it was, I just began to not only deal with it, I began to enjoy it. And the public speaking piece is part of it's my personality. I'm a people person. I I love being the center of attention. And and I love teaching. And so that public speaking really scratched the itch on all those different things. And, I guarantee that there's people that are listening to this, maybe everybody, that if they are up in front of a group of residents 200 times, it's going to be easier than the first time.
Yeah.
It just does. And so there's no magic bullet. There's certainly things you can say when you talk to yourself before you go up, or things that you can do. But it's like, I always, and this comes into play when you're cold calling or prospecting too, is that you wouldn't care how much people thought about you if you knew how little they did.
Yeah.
But everybody always thinks that, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, they're going to think of me, and then they're going to leave here and they're still going to be thinking about me. No, they're not. Like you are, but they're not. They're thinking about themselves, because that's what we do. And that certainly made a big impact to me.
So another skill that you've coached me a lot on, I'd say probably might be one of the biggest, most effective advice I've ever received, has been the advice you've given me on time management.
Mhm.
Like being a master of my own calendar. If I put something on my calendar, stick to it, take care of it. How did you become so good at time management? What's your current time management regimen? And I guess what was the process of becoming a person who can really manage their time well?
I certainly tried to learn more. I've read books. I mean, the 12-week year, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. My dad taught me a lot about this. So a lot of those things have helped me learn the knowledge, but to actually do it, why I pursued that and tried to get better at that is because when I started out in the business 6-7 years ago, it was a necessity, right? Like most people can remember a certain amount of things that they're doing on days, but when you're trying to just book as many appointments as you can for yourself and do that, like, you have to get good or you just flat out will fail. It's just a requirement. And so it was something I had to get good at. And my mentality tends to be like, okay, if I need to get good at this thing, then I'm going to be great at it. And I'm going to turn this into a strength. And so that meant, yes, developing the skill, but also like, what are some other technologies that I can utilize to help me with this? And so I learned a lot from the 12-week year and Brian Moran, as far as like blocking out time for different things and knowing before the week starts, like, what are the big rocks that you need to have in your calendar, and how do you work everything around those things to make sure by the time the week is done, or even the day is done, you're looking back and thinking, okay, I felt like I did a lot, but I didn't get anything accomplished. Or are you looking back and thinking, okay, yes, I worked a lot. There were some things I didn't get done, but I at least got the important things done. So it's, how do you keep the main thing, and major on the majors and other stuff like that, keeping it a priority of like, and I would start to feel that. And you and I have talked about that before. Like, do you ever feel like you're just like, okay, I'm working, or I'm starting to get overwhelmed, or I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing right now, but there's so many things I know I should be doing. And it's like, at that moment, you kind of like focus in and be like, okay, what's the one thing that's important right now? And now you can do that with a calendar for sure. But you think I'm good at time management, but I'm not sure I've ever had a week where and I try to pack my week with just not meetings per se, but stuff for me, like do this in this day. I'll look at my to-do list at the beginning of the week, and then I'll block out time for those things throughout the week. And I'm usually 50 to 80% successful.
Yeah.
But, I guess that's better than.
Well, I think
zero.
Knocking out 50 to 80% of the big rocks, that's a much more effective thing than I think what most people do is they knock out 100% of the pebbles or the sand, so. In closing here.
I lost you somehow.
Yeah, I think we lost connection. Did you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back.
All right. I think Zoom picked up my last comment, but it wasn't essential. So
well played, Zoom.
Last question here, closing out. What advice would you have for a young, ambitious advisor, if there's a John right now in 2020, exiting the pandemic or in the heart of the pandemic, somebody who wants to build their own book of business, what are kind of the general pieces of advice you'd give to a young John right now?
Probably same thing that I said to myself when I made a decision to join Principal in the Centennial Group back then. Was I could have done it on my own back then, but I didn't have the knowledge or the skill or the training system and the accountability. So however you have to do it, if you've got to start at a kind of career shop somewhere, or start in some way where you can leave at some point if that's what you want to do, but put your time in, 2 to 3 years of just learning, doing joint work with other advisors is the quickest and best way to learn. And don't wait until you feel like you're never going to. Don't wait until you feel like, okay, I know enough now that I'm confident to go out and try to meet with prospects. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to meet with the prospects first, and you'll figure it out, and bring in some help, connect with somebody. So I don't ever recommend somebody just start into this day one fresh on their own. Hey, I'm going to start my own RIA and we're going to figure this out because I have my CFP. And you've got the knowledge, I guess, but there's a lot of things the CFP doesn't teach you. And I know I'm probably 4 or 5 courses into the CFP, and it's great and it's integral and it's important, but the art of being a financial planner, let alone the skills of growing your own business, are not in there. And those need to be picked up along the way just through the school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
And so find a place that has a good system. And if you want to leave in 2, 3 to 5 years, you can take clients with you. There's not a strong non-compete, all that kind of stuff. So think that through. And I can definitely, if anybody wants direction on that of where to go or where some good places that are conducive to that, certainly there's, I can point them in the right direction, but that's what I would think through. If you, like Justin was saying, if you know yourself and your personality and know that this isn't something that I want to just be an employee the rest of my life, you may have to for a little bit, or you may have to at least start out in some kind of team setting, and then you'll have what it takes after that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
My pleasure.
If you liked what you just heard, please like, comment, and share. This is Vincent Pacillo, producer of the MSU-WMA podcast. MSU-WMA, or Michigan State University Wealth Management Association, is a student organization part of the Eli Broad College of Business, located in East Lansing, Michigan. Our mission is to inspire and educate the next generation of financial planners. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please check out our channel on all platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcast. And check out our social media at MSUWMA and MSUWMA.com.